Я для вас сейчас играю мелодию, которая называется «Кукушка».
For about 4 years, a group of us, the Silkroad Ensemble, worked doing festivals, creating concert programs, doing children's programs, trying to take a number of traditions from around the world, understanding them first of all, and then trying to communicate and share them with audiences in Europe, North America, and in Asia.
You all know about the Silkroad. It runs all the way from Japan to Italy. People would trade goods back and forth up and down the Silkroad. And also, not only would they trade goods like, for example, silk, which is, of course, why it's named that way, but they would also trade ideas and information. Can anybody tell me sort of the modern equivalent of that? Right here, yeah. What is the modern equivalent of that?
The internet?
Yeah, the internet, exactly, where you trade ideas and information all around the globe. Now, of course, when you do it by camel, it's a lot slower than doing it by the internet.
我们3个人，他是来自日本，我来自中国，他来自科克斯坦。然后呢，我们3个音乐家完全不知道要奏什么。然后我们就说，你开始，或者你开始，谁起个头，我们2个人就跟上。所以很有意义，你知道吧？你完全那个音律也不一样，这个音阶也不一样，什么都不一样，感觉也不一样。但是3个音乐家当奏出来的时候，那种感觉，你要去找，要去靠，非常有意义。
Yo-Yo often talks about trust as being a very important thing in the Silkroad project. Trust for musicians, I think, is when you get together and you come from different traditions, right? It's the ability not only to bring out your own traditions and share that and explain that to other people, but also while you're playing the music, you listen to what the other person's traditions are and allow the other person to fill the musical space.
丝绸之路计划的一个目的，我想就是说去寻找音乐的根源。琵琶这件乐器，我们说是中国来的，但是你要去追查一下历史的话，回头看这个历史的话，它并不是说完全是中国的，它也是从中亚那边传过来的，后来变成了中国的一件乐器，就是有中国语言在里面了。
Everybody today is going to walk out of here with a musical instrument that comes along the Silkroad, a string instrument. If you have the can all the way down to one side, it's like a Chinese guitar called a pipa. And if you have it in the middle, kind of like this, then it's like a Chinese instrument called a chin, which works like that. Now here's what you have to do. You take the fishing line, you make a loop, You stick it through the hole like this, all the way at one end of the string. The next step is you will each get a dog food can from my dog Alonso, okay? And by the way, they've all been washed and cleaned. No dog food was left inside. And you'll get a piece of wood, which will hold up the strings. This is called a bridge, and this lets the strings vibrate.
That's fine. Okay.
One of the centerpieces of the museum that all the musicians loved was this Chinese house that was brought over and rebuilt in the museum. And when music appeared in the house, it just made, I think, the tour for the visitor much more compelling.
声的来源确实是中国本土产生的东西。最开始它只是竹子，和底下的斗，最早是葫芦，把这个几个竹子插到葫芦上边，然后这个里边有簧片。刚开始也就是3个、4个，然后慢慢增加到17个。
Now, the way you're going to make this instrument is everybody's going to get 4 straws of different sizes, and you're going to sort of drill open those holes as you go. There you go. If you find that it's really hard to blow through it, you can also blow through the top part.
For a valuable tradition to continue, we need to share it with the next generation, because every generation has to rediscover what the world is all about on their terms.
How does the drummer play? Does the drummer have notes?
Does the drummer have notes? That's such an interesting question. Shane, do you have notes?
Yes, I do have notes. I just don't look at them. The composer didn't really know a lot about tabla, because they're from India, he's from China, so he hadn't really studied them. So he wrote in Western notation for those drums, basically using regular rhythm that you use to notate piano or violin or other percussion instruments in the West. And basically what he did was he put just a high and a low symbol, and with the rhythm notated. So I had to interpret that on these drums.
丝绸之路计划，它这次博物馆的这样的一种形式，观众可以围绕着你，甚至就坐在你边上，坐在你身边，完了以后问很多问题。这些活动，我对观众或者对音乐家来说，都是一个很难忘的一个经历。
This actually has a documented history of coming in to Japan through China and Korea, way back in the 7th century when they were importing a lot of culture at the time.
Very good. Okay, thank you.
Breaks it up nicely.
Yes.
I know. So it's not just music or not just stories. It's kind of everything.
Oh, you see that, Ren? There's all those different places. Wow, it's really neat. It has like a great
Once upon a time, not twice upon a time, not 3 times upon a time, just once and never again.
There was and there was not a king. This king had lived a long life. He was loved by his people.
The idea of not only material goods and technologies traveling from east to west and west to east, but the idea of stories, religious beliefs, philosophies moving really excites me, because for me, the most interesting culture is, of course, psychic culture. It's the culture of the inside, the internal being. And stories all take place in the mind's eye of the listener. The swine dragon leapt out of the pool of water and swallowed him down. And the father heard a terrified scream, and he came with his axe and he cut through the trees and he came to the water, but the water was still. There was no sign of his boy except for one straw sandal. It is possible for me to tell stories from China, Korea, and Japan, because I know that parallel stories exist in Sweden and Southern Ireland, and that the level of story that really is the level that speaks is the human emotional level.
Rizbek is from Kyrgyzstan, and in Kyrgyzstan there's a tradition of recitation that's called the manas. Manas is to Kyrgyzstan what the Iliad was to Greece. Manas is over 100,000 lines long, and Rizbek learned it not by reading but from hearing it since he was a child. It is a very spiritual performance. It's poetry, it's storytelling, it is gestural acting. He is inspired and he goes into trance. He is a transcendent performer. We all try to get to that other place. Well, he does it all the time.
In this triptych by Ghulam Mohammed Sheikh, there are a lot of narratives that are embedded within each one of the panels. What occurred to me was, maybe we can create a soundscape, getting sounds of a street or sounds of a house that might correspond to each one of these narratives within the work. She'll select a piece with her gestures, bring it out to you, and then pass it on to us, where we'll do an improvisation.
What we've been trying to do with the Silkroad project was to also take art objects and merge them with narrative and with music so that each one informs the other. One of the objects that the musicians really loved was this scroll depicting an emperor's journey in China many years ago.
乾隆下江南这个题材，因为他去杭州，正好又是我的家乡，就是哎呀，这个我太熟了，好像就觉得哎呀，这个我知道。我们把它像电影一样放出来，所以再配上乐，是个很有意思的事情，就把这个南巡图好像活起来了。
演奏家的每一个局部、每一个表情、每一个神态，吹笙的、打锣敲鼓的非常就是很传神。那么多的人物，你要是看每一个人物，他没有雷同，画得很细。我们做的时候呢，要尽量的，就是说也是按照他这种南方的这种意境、这种音乐，做一点细点的一点线条的东西。
The musicians were able to write music, improvise music, stopping at certain places that were interesting, and other places a storyteller would suddenly say, look at what's happening there.
Who are these fierce-looking gentlemen dressed in red? Many, many hundreds of years.
Working on Journey to the South was very interesting because I had to find the story possibilities within it. And sometimes I feel that the story spirits, my colleagues and I, we call them the story spirits, help. And just outside the main bulk of Chinatown in London, there's a very specific shop. And there they had Zhonghui, this wonderful representation of him. And I said, well, we must work with Zhonghui in this piece.
This being was dressed in red with a big belly. This being had blazing eyes. This being had huge moustaches. This being was incredibly ugly. This being strode straight down towards the little demon, grabbed it by its throat, raised it in the air, squeezed it with its left fist, threw the demon down on the ground, stamped him underfoot, and kicked him out of the palace. And then he bowed. And the emperor said, "Who are you?" And he said, "My name is Zhonghui."
I think there are great engines in the world. Political engine is obviously unbelievably important. Economic engines are incredibly important. But I would also like to suggest that cultural engines are equally important. And the best way of living is when everything is going well. But sometimes some engines falter. And I think the cultural engine is very interesting because you can actually go through time. You're using your imagination, you're using knowledge, scholarly knowledge, creative knowledge, to be able to go to other periods of time and look for models.